They say the Wendigo moves like smoke, silent, starving, and never far behind. Somewhere deep in the woods, it waits. But not all monsters live in forests. Some wear the faces of children, eyes black as night, smiles that don't belong. Others linger in abandoned asylums where the screams never stopped, or crawl out of forgotten graves, dragging the cold with them. You're about to hear the stories they don't tell around campfires, the ones that follow you into your dreams. Welcome to Whispers After Dark, where the shadows speak and the night listens. So lay back, close your eyes, and whatever you do, don't open them. Tonight we start with the Wendigo of Black Hollow Lake. They say Black Hollow Lake is calm at first, but when the cold fog creeps in, the silence feels wrong, like the whole forest is holding its breath. This is the story of a forgotten cabin deep in the hollow and the ancient hunger that watches from the dark. It was supposed to be just another fishing trip. Two brothers, Mark and Jesse, returned to their grandfather's old lakefront cabin, hidden deep in Black Hollow, miles from the nearest town and even farther from cell reception. The place hadn't been touched in over 20 years. Dust covered the windows, cobwebs clung to the corners, and the old dock groaned like it remembered every step ever taken on it. The place held the memories of their childhood. They had loaded up Mark's old truck, anxious to leave behind the noise of city life and the everyday stress for the peace and quiet of the lake. But the silence they found wasn't peaceful. On the second night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked like trees splitting in half, and rain pounded the old roof. Jesse couldn't sleep. Maybe it was just his imagination, but he thought he could hear footsteps on the porch. He kept thinking about the stories Grandpa used to tell them, the ones about the creatures in the woods, about how people would go into Black Hollow and never come out. But there was one story that came to his mind as the storm raged outside. It was straight out of horror movie, a legend of a creature of insatiable hunger. The Wendigo lives up in the woods, Grandpa would say, rocking in his creaky old chair by the fire. It comes when the cold sets in, feeds on the greedy, the lost. It's always hungry, and once you hear it cry, it already knows your name. Sometimes I hear its call, always in your grandma's voice, soft, sweet, trying to lure me out. One day, it'll take me, just like it will you. Jesse laughed it off as a kid, but now with the wind howling like a living thing and something tapping faintly at the window, he wasn't so sure. Outside, lightning lit up the sky as thunder rolled across the lake's dark waters. He got out of bed and slowly walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside only a bit. The tapping was gone, just trees, darkness, rain. Occasionally he got a glimpse of the dock. For a moment, quicker than he could blink, a figure was there, tall, thin, with a tangle of something like antlers. Jesse blinked and it was gone. The tapping came again, this time around the side window by the kitchen sink to the back. Tap, 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 then silence, then again, a shape, tall, wrong, stepped out from behind the tree line. It looked like a man, but too thin, too long, and its eyes white, glowing. Jesse stepped back, heart hammering. "Mark," he whispered. "Mark, wake up." Mark stirred, irritated. "Someone's out there." That's when they heard it, a scream, not quite human, not quite animal, somewhere in between, long and hollow, like it had been dragged up from the bottom of a frozen throat. Mark grabbed the axe from beside the fireplace. They shut off the lantern, held their breath, and then something stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked, slow and deliberate, step by step by step, a scraping sound like claws raking across the wood of the cabin walls. Then nothing, no knock, no growl, just the sound of breathing on the other side of the wall, wet, rattling, and unnatural. The sounds taunted them for hours. When morning finally broke, the porch was empty, but the muddy ground showed prints that weren't human, long, clawed, deep. For a long time, Jesse stared into the woods at the growing mist just beyond the tree line, like he could still hear it calling his name. Jesse kept replaying the night in his head, those hollow screams, the clawed footprints, the breathing just beyond the wall. While they ate breakfast, Mark tried to explain it away. A bear, maybe, or some kind of trick of the wind. But Jesse noticed the way Mark gripped his coffee cup. He didn't believe his own words. What if the stories Grandpa told were true? What if that Wendigo thing did finally come for him? Jesse asked. I mean, he came up here one weekend and just never came back. Don't go there, Jesse, Mark said. He was old and too stubborn for his own good. He probably just had a heart attack out in those damn woods somewhere. I'm going fishing. Are you coming? They spent the rest of the day fishing. The lake, once peaceful, looked gray and dead beneath the overcast sky. Not a single fish bit, not a bird sang. Even the trees seemed still, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. By late afternoon, the air had turned colder than it should have been for that time of year, the kind of cold that slips beneath your skin and makes your bones ache. Twilight came early, too early, and with it, the feeling. Mark felt it first, like something watching from just beyond the tree line, a shape in the gloom, half seen through the fog. Tall, wrong. As the moon rose higher in the night sky, it moved. Silent, not exactly walking, more like gliding between the trees, as if it didn't need to touch the ground, as if it wasn't made for this world. He froze mid-step on the dock, the hair on his neck rising. He blinked, and it was gone. Icy rain began to fall as he walked to the truck and tried to crank it, dead. He didn't tell Jesse. That night, the voices came. They started just after midnight, whispering from the woods, too faint to make out at first. Mark had just settled into bed when Jesse shook him, pale-faced. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Mark listened. At first, it sounded like the wind curling through the trees. Then, words, muted, repeating. It was a man's voice, almost familiar, haunting. The voice called again. This time they understood. "Come." And then the voice came again. This time it called their names. It was soft, familiar, and coming from every direction. "No one knows we're here," Mark said under his breath. The brothers sat in silence, backs to the wall, eyes fixed on the black windows. The whispers continued, circling the cabin like vultures. Then came the scratching, not at the door this time, but the roof. Something was up there, crawling, dragging itself across the shingles, slow, deliberate, and then a thud, right above their heads. Mark gripped the axe. Jesse's grip tightened on his hunting rifle. Neither moved, and both barely breathed. The thudding stopped, but they didn't sleep. The next morning, Mark found something at the base of the cabin, tufts of black hair, tangled with old blood. No footprints this time, just a strange smell in the air, like rotting meat left too long in the sun. But the weather was freezing. The smell shouldn't have been there. That evening, they sat on the porch steps. Mark told his brother about what he saw by the lake and the truck's dead battery. Jesse just nodded, then admitted he'd seen something too, reflected in the cabin's window the night before. The brothers scanned the tree line, uneasy in the growing cold silence of the lake. They agreed to leave in the morning. If the truck wouldn't start, they would hike out. But the woods had other plans. A tall shape moved silently in the tree line, watching from the mists. Its lipless grin let out a hiss in the silence. Around it the ground froze. As night fell, the storm returned, heavier than before. The wind howled like it wanted in, and the whispers came again. Louder now, more voices. Some sounded like the cries of children lost, lonely. Others weren't quite human. The shadows in the corners of the cabin began to move, stretching, crawling. Jesse lit every lantern he could find. Mark boarded the windows, but nothing stopped the voices. Nothing silenced the dragging footsteps on the roof. Then came the knock, 1, 2, 3, then silence, and a voice calling through the door. It was their grandfather's voice, but their grandfather had died 12 years ago. "Let me in, boys. It's cold out here." Jesse stepped toward the door, eyes wide, hands trembling. Mark caught his arm. "That's not Grandpa," he whispered. The thing outside laughed. low, cruel, inhuman. And then the door bulged inward as if something enormous had thrown its weight against it. They ran, through the back window, out into the woods, into the storm. No flashlights, no plan, just the blind urge to escape. But the forest wasn't the same. The trees had closed in. The paths were gone. Time felt wrong, like they'd stepped into a place the world had forgotten. Behind them something followed, fast, silent, just a breath behind their heels. Jesse tripped, cut his leg deep on a rock. Mark dragged him forward until the trees parted again and the lake appeared. The old dock, the cabin in the distance, windows glowing. They had circled back. They hadn't escaped at all. The creature was hurting them. They stood at the edge of the lake, breathless, soaked, bleeding, and cold. The cabin windows flickered, lanterns still burning inside. But the air felt wrong, too still. No wind, no storm, just silence. Mark helped Jesse up the dock, each board creaking louder than the last. The cabin, once a place of warmth and memory, now looked like a trap waiting to close. "I don't think we're supposed to be here," Jesse whispered. "I don't think we ever left," Mark replied. Then they saw it, inside the cabin. A shadow moving just beyond the light, tall, bony, its limbs too long, its head crowned with what looked like antlers made of bone and rot. It was watching them, and smiling a lipless horror of sharp, jagged teeth. The brothers froze. Then the door creaked open, on its own. Inside, the cabin looked different, darker, warped. The fire was burning cold, flames blue, not orange, and the shadows on the walls moved without light to cast them. They found themselves walking up the hill and towards the cabin. They had no will of their own, and no matter how hard they struggled, they got closer step by step. Together they stepped onto the porch. They fought against the pull of the cabin, but it was no use. Once inside, the door slammed shut behind them. The room stretched, impossibly large now, too big for the cabin's size. The air was thick with the stench of decay and frost. Jesse raised the rifle. Mark held the axe, but their hands trembled, their breath froze in the air. The Wendigo stepped forward, its eyes, milky glowing, met theirs, and for a moment, time stopped. Then it spoke, not with words, but inside their heads. Like a scream buried in snow, "You smell like hunger, and I never forget the taste of bloodlines." Mark swung the axe. It passed through mist. The creature vanished, then reappeared behind him. Jesse fired the rifle, but the sound was swallowed by the unnatural quiet. The shot hit, nothing. The Wendigo didn't attack like an animal. It waited, played, watched, fed off fear like it was meat. The brothers backed into the far corner, weapons raised, hearts pounding, and then the cabin began to shift, walls pulsing like lungs, floorboards cracking, bleeding black water. The air felt like being buried alive. That's when Jesse realized the truth. They were never meant to survive. This place wasn't a cabin anymore. It was a mouth, and they were already inside it. Some say a rescue team found the place months later. Empty, no brothers, no blood, just claw marks on the walls and strange symbols carved into the floor. Others say you can still hear them on cold, stormy nights, voices crying out from the lake just before the wind shifts. And if you ever find yourself deep in the woods, near an old fishing cabin that smells like death and silence, don't go inside, because the Wendigo doesn't chase you. It waits. And when you finally see it, it's already too late. Our next story takes us to a dark mountain road, peaceful and quiet until the knocking starts. Our story is Children of the Dark Road. They knock at your door late at night, small, polite, and strangely calm. But something's wrong with their eyes, pitch black and endless, like looking into the void. These aren't lost children, they're something else entirely. Whatever you do, don't invite them in, unless you're ready to disappear. Emily had been living the van life for nearly a year, trading city noise for silence, deadlines for daybreaks, and traffic for winding forest roads. Her van had become both her escape and her sanctuary. taking her from coastlines to canyons with only the sound of tires on pavement and the occasional podcast to keep her company. That evening, she'd pulled off a lonely stretch of mountain road in West Virginia. No signs, no signal, just the hum of the engine fading beneath a sky full of stars. The forest felt peaceful then, like it was holding its breath. Emily welcomed the quiet, until the knock came. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the camper door. Her heart stuttered. She hadn't seen another soul for hours. Just trees, shadows, and now someone or something was out there in the dark. She'd been asleep when the first knock woke her like a whisper in her ear. She sat up, heart thudding. Looked out the small side window. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, standing in the pale glow of her porch light, maybe 10, 11 years old. No shoes, no coats, just pale skin and hair that clung to their foreheads like they'd walked through a storm. Something was off. They didn't knock again. They just stood there, heads tilted slightly, unmoving. Emily cracked the window. "You okay?" she called. The boy responded first. "Our car broke down," he said, voice flat. Wrong, like he was reading it from memory. "We need to come inside," the girl added, "just to use your phone." Emily hesitated, her gut twisted. There was no car out there. "I can call someone for you in the morning," she replied. "There is no cell service out here." A long pause. Then both children spoke at once in perfect sync. "We can't come in unless you invite us." That's when she saw their eyes. Not dark, not brown, black, solid black. No whites, no pupils, just endless inky voids that seemed to pull at her. Emily slammed the window shut. The children didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't blink. She pulled the curtains and backed away, heart racing, every nerve screaming. She didn't know what they were, but they weren't human. Not anymore. Then came the whispering. From all around the van, like dozens of voices, all murmuring just beneath the surface of hearing. She couldn't make out the words, but she felt them like a buzz in her head that got louder and louder, one voice drowning out the next. The knock came again, harder, pounding on the door. Emily pressed her hands against her ears to try to block out the sounds as she searched frantically for her keys, then saw them on the hook beside the side door. Slowly she inched her way to the door. Suddenly the girl's face appeared in the window. Her mouth slowly changed to a grin. She fumbled for her keys and climbed into the driver's seat. She wanted to leave, but the road wasn't wide enough to turn around. The trees closed in around her until the road all but disappeared. Out her front window she could see them standing in front of the van. Eyes black as pitch, not speaking, not moving. Then, as if in sync, they tilted their heads, smiled, and then they vanished. At some point, exhaustion overtook her. When she woke, it was morning. Sunlight poured through the windshield, birds sang. The clearing was empty, no children, no footprints. But on the window, drawn in the dust of the road by a small, pale finger, were 3 words, "We'll come back." Emily scrambled into the driver's seat, engine roaring to life as the mist still clung to the trees. She didn't stop to eat, didn't even change out of her pajamas. That day, she drove 8 hours straight and checked into a hotel. After that night, she never camped alone again, and never in the deep woods. Because some places are quiet for a reason, and some knocks should never be answered. And the black-eyed children, they have to be invited, so they wait, and they never come alone. So if you hear a knock after midnight, don't answer, and above all, never let them in. Everyone knows it is dangerous to accept a ride from a stranger. But what would you do if you found yourself alone in an old graveyard in the middle of nowhere and the fog rolls in? Would you accept a ride? Come along for our next story, A Ride from the Dead, a ghost story. It was the kind of night that seemed to stretch forever, thick with fog, the moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. The biting cold seeped through her hoodie and into her skin as the dirt crunched beneath her shoes. She had been driving until she ran out of gas, and found herself stranded with no cell reception and her phone almost dead. It felt like she had been walking for hours. The moon had been bright when she started out. She couldn't quite remember how she had ended up here, in the middle of nowhere at a desolate graveyard. The dirt road at first seemed to end at the graveyard gates. Just then clouds shifted, and in the distance, she could see the road in the distance beyond the small cemetery. To get back on it, she had to cut across the graveyard. The old iron gate stood ajar, creaking with each gust of wind. The gravestones, worn and crooked, were barely visible in the darkness, their names eroded by time. Lily's breath misted in the air as she hesitated at the entrance, unsure of which direction to go. She felt a deep unease, the kind that crawls under your skin and makes you question your every step. But the path ahead seemed to be the only option left. With a glance over her shoulder, she stepped inside. The graveyard was silent, but not peaceful. There was something unnatural about the stillness, like the very air was thick with the weight of forgotten souls. The mist curled between the gravestones, twisting in strange, ghostly patterns, as if something unseen was moving just out of sight. Lily kept walking, her heart pounding in her chest. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath her feet and the occasional rustling of branches. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was following her. But when she turned around, there was no one there, only the graves and shadows. Suddenly, the distant hum of an engine cut through the stillness. Lily squinted into the fog, her eyes catching the dim headlights of a car pulling slowly down the path toward her. It was an old sedan, the kind that seemed out of place in such a forgotten place. The car came to a stop in front of her, and the passenger side window rolled down. A man and a woman sat inside, both of them staring at her with unnervingly calm expressions. "Lost, dear?" the man asked, his voice low and smooth, like it came from a place deep inside the earth. Lily nodded, too exhausted to be wary. "I think so," she replied. "I don't know how I ended up here." "Don't worry," the woman said, her smile tight and strange. "You're safe with us." There was something about them that seemed off. They looked too pristine for the surroundings, their clothes too neat, their skin too pale. But Lily, desperate and disoriented, felt the need to get out of the graveyard. The fog was thickening, and she could barely see past the headlights now. She climbed into the back seat without a second thought. The man started the car, and they drove slowly, almost deliberately, down the winding road, away from the graveyard. But as they drove, Lily began to feel more uneasy. The air inside the car was cold, and the silence pressed in on her like a physical weight. She glanced up at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing to reflect but the darkness behind them. After a few minutes, she broke the silence. "Where are we going?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, the woman turned to her with that same tight smile. "We're taking you home, dear," she said, her voice soft, but it held something almost hollow in it. Lily blinked. "Home?" she asked. "But you don't know where I live." A shiver ran down Lily's spine as she turned to look out the window. The road was changing. The trees, the fog, they were fading into nothingness, replaced by blackness so complete it was as if they were driving into the heart of a void. And then, without warning, the car stopped. The man and the woman both turned to her, their eyes now impossibly dark, black, like endless pits. "Get out," the woman said, her smile gone. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her body felt frozen, like her very soul was being pulled in two. She reached for the door handle, but the car door was already open, the cold wind rushing in. She stepped out, feet touching the ground, and found herself standing once again in the graveyard. But it wasn't the same graveyard. The mist had thickened, and the gravestones now seemed to stretch endlessly into the fog. The air felt oppressive, and the darkness around her was alive, pulsing, as if the very ground beneath her feet was waiting to swallow her whole. The car was gone. The man and the woman were gone. And now, only one thing remained: the sound of footsteps. Lily turned, her heart hammering in her chest, and saw a shadow moving toward her. A figure tall, thin, and draped in tattered white cloth. It was a woman, or something that had once been a woman, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted into a soundless scream. It was her, the woman from the car, the one who had smiled, the one who had promised her home. But now the woman was no longer a figure of kindness. She was the very thing Lily had been trying to escape. And as the figure reached for her, Lily realized she had never truly left the graveyard. Some say the graveyard never lets go, that the spirits there don't rest, they wander, waiting for someone to take their place. And if you're lost enough, tired enough, maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one they offer a ride to. For our next story, we step into the fog of an unsettling urban legend, one that has haunted the quiet suburbs of Fresno, California, for decades. A story of something unnatural, something that moves in the dark, gliding soundlessly just beyond the edge of your vision. Some call them the night crawlers. Others refuse to speak of them at all. But some have seen them, and what they saw, they will never forget. Now, let's get into our story. Fresno in the late 80s wasn't much different from how it had been a decade before. Quiet, suburban, a little dull. Rows of single-story houses with chain-link fences, kids riding BMX bikes, and the occasional wood-paneled station wagon cruising by. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, and weird stories didn't spread too far. But Kevin Marshall had one of his own. Kevin wasn't the type to scare easily. He was 22, just out of trade school, and had just rented his first house, a small place on the edge of town where the neighborhood started fading into open fields and farmland. It was cheap, isolated, and it came with a huge backyard that stretched almost seamlessly into the empty fields behind it. No fences, no boundaries, just miles of dry, golden grass swaying in the wind. The first few weeks were fine. The place was quiet, peaceful. Then he started noticing something strange. It began with his porch light flickering on and off at random. Then his trash cans kept getting knocked over, but there were never any footprints in the dirt. One night around 2 a.m., Kevin woke up to the sound of his back door rattling. It wasn't the wind. When he flicked on the kitchen light and looked outside, the door was still locked, but something felt off. That's when he decided to set up his camcorder. He set it up on a tripod, pointing toward the open field behind his house. The next morning, he popped the VHS tape into his video player and sat on the edge of his chair to watch the recording. For the first hour, nothing. Just empty field, the occasional gust of wind. Then, movement. At exactly 3:14 a.m., something stepped into frame. Kevin sat forward, gripping the armrest of his couch. It was tall, pale, unnaturally thin. At first he thought it was a person, but it had no arms, just long, bent legs, moving in a slow, gliding motion. Then another one, identical, moving alongside the first, silent, unnatural. Kevin's stomach knotted. Then at 3:16 a.m., a third figure appeared. It was twice as tall as the others, and this one stopped moving. It stood there, still, watching. Then slowly, it turned its head. Kevin's breath caught in his throat, and then it started moving, not toward the camera, toward the house. Kevin lunged for the VCR, yanking the tape out. He didn't care about watching more. He didn't want to know what happened next. Then he heard it. A soft thump against his bedroom window. Kevin didn't look. He didn't breathe. He grabbed his car keys, bolted out the front door, and sped off in his beat-up Chevy Nova, not even bothering to lock the house behind him. He crashed at a friend's place that night. When he finally returned the next afternoon, his backyard was untouched. No footprints, no broken locks, just the wind in the dry grass. He never watched the tape again. 2 weeks later, he broke his lease and left Fresno for good. Years later, while visiting his family in Oklahoma for Christmas, Kevin found himself in the family room after dinner, surrounded by laughter and the warm glow of holiday lights. One of his nephews flipped through TV channels and landed on a video about urban legends. When grainy security footage of the Fresno Nightcrawlers appeared on the screen, Kevin just shook his head. "They don't always stay in the woods," Kevin muttered, his face pale as he reached for his drink with an unsteady hand. He took a slow sip, his fingers tightening around the glass. "Sometimes they come closer." His father, watching him carefully, leaned forward. "Is that why you needed the money when you broke your lease all those years ago?" Kevin exhaled slowly, then turned to meet his father's gaze. He held it for a long moment, steady, unwavering. Finally, he nodded. He wouldn't lie to his father. Without another word, he took a slow sip from the glass in his hand and let the conversation fade into the crackling sound of the fireplace. After Kevin left that Christmas, his father couldn't shake the uneasy feeling his son's words had left behind. Late one night, when the house was quiet and the holiday warmth had faded, he found himself digging through an old drawer, the one where he kept things too important to throw away, but too unsettling to face. There, buried beneath old letters and forgotten papers, he found it. A worn manila envelope, its edges yellowed with time. Kevin had mailed it to him years ago, scrawled across the front in bold, uneven letters, "Open in case I don't make it." His hands tensed as he carefully peeled it open. Inside, there was only a single VHS tape. Across the label, in Kevin's familiar, hurried scrawl, were 4 words that sent a chill down his spine. "Do not watch this alone." Old legends tell of something ancient and hungry that was stirred from its slumber long ago. A curse, some say, that awakened a creature long before the asylum ever stood. Rumors whisper of a creature that lives within Deadwater Asylum. It doesn't chase you. It waits, and when you finally see it, it's already too late. No body, no scream, just silence, and the empty space where you used to be. Join me for our next story about Deadwater Asylum. There are places where darkness and time become tangled, places where even the bravest souls vanish without a trace. Deadwater Asylum is one such place, and its haunted past is enough to make anyone reconsider a late-night thrill-seeking adventure. But for a small paranormal investigation team from New Orleans, curiosity proved to be their undoing. The team had heard the rumors, of course. The whispers that swirled around Deadwater, the eerie mist that never seemed to dissipate, of vanishing patients and something called the Hollow One. But they were experienced, seasoned investigators who had faced ghosts, spirits, and worse before. They were prepared. So they thought. It was just after midnight when they arrived. The air was thick with fog, so dense that even the glow of their headlights barely cut through it. As they pulled up to the gates, the towering asylum loomed like a dark beast in the distance. The overgrown trees seemed to press against the crumbling stone walls, as if trying to keep intruders out, or perhaps trying to keep something in. There were 5 of them: Liam, Maya, Ben, Sarah, and Zach, each with their own personal reasons for taking on the Deadwater challenge. The promise of fame, the desire to prove something, or maybe, just maybe, the hope of witnessing something extraordinary. They set up their equipment near the entrance, their voices tense but excited. The air was heavy, thick with that oppressive silence that seemed to come from nowhere. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, a stark contrast to the stillness around them. They spoke in low tones, each of them trying to shake off the sense that something was terribly wrong. "We're here to prove it's just a myth," Liam said, adjusting his flashlight. "No such thing as ghosts," Maya added with a nervous laugh, though her eyes darted uneasily toward the darkness that swallowed the path ahead. The first few hours were uneventful. Strange noises, a creak in the floorboards, the distant sound of whispering, just enough to keep their nerves on edge. But they had all heard those sounds before. This was the part of the investigation that always felt the same, the lull before the storm. But then, around 3 a.m., things began to change. Maya was the first to notice the footsteps. They were faint at first, barely audible over the sound of their own breathing. But they were there, slow, deliberate, as if someone were walking just behind them, too close for comfort. "Maya?" Liam whispered, his voice tight with unease. "You hear that?" She nodded, gripping her EMF detector tighter. "Yeah, I hear it. It's behind us." Ben, the skeptic of the group, rolled his eyes. But then the footsteps grew louder, sharper, closer. The group fell silent, the hair on the back of their necks standing up. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, a biting cold that seemed to come from nowhere, seeping into their bones. The heavy air around them thickened, pressing in on them, as if the asylum itself was alive, aware of their presence. They turned in unison, expecting to see someone, anything that could explain what was happening. But there was nothing, no one, just the darkness. But then they saw it. At the far end of the hall, standing motionless in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs stretched like tattered rags, reaching out in eerie silence. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids, and its mouth hung open, as if in a permanent scream, though no sound escaped. Ben took a step back. "What the hell is that?" Liam's flashlight flickered, and when it blinked back to life, the figure was gone. The group froze, their hearts racing, eyes wide with fear. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, almost like the very walls of Deadwater were groaning in pain. The air grew heavier, suffocating, as if the weight of the asylum itself had come to claim them. "We need to leave. Now," Liam said, grabbing Maya's arm and pulling her back down the hallway with him. The rest of the team followed. They were looking for the doors they had come in, but the hallway had changed. The path they had come from was now a solid wall of darkness. There was no way out, no way back. They could hear the footsteps of the Hollow One, slow, steady, making its way through the dark towards them. In a panic, they scrambled for their equipment, calling out for help, though they all knew it was hopeless. The radio crackled to life, but only static responded. The door was locked, as though the asylum itself had sealed them in, and the footsteps continued, growing louder, moving closer. In the panic, they became separated. What looked like an exit became a maze of shifting rooms and corridors, constantly changing. Doors slammed shut, walls moved, stairs appeared, and led to nowhere. One by one, the team members disappeared. A scream. Then nothing. Silence for a bit. Then the footsteps would start again. Maya was the first to vanish, her screams lost in the cold, dead air. Then Ben, then Sarah, each of them drawn into the darkness, their faces frozen in terror as they disappeared without a trace. Liam and Zach tried to run, but the Hollow One was always behind them. The last sound they heard before their own vanishings was the soft, insidious echo of footsteps in the dark. And then, silence. A week later, a trucker found Liam lying beside the road next to the Welcome to Deadwater sign. For days he didn't speak, and when the police finally searched for the rest of the team, they found nothing. But Liam knows they are still there, wandering around in that cursed maze forever pursued by the Hollow One. Sometimes he wonders if he ever made it out. But one thing he knows for sure about Deadwater Asylum, there is a cursed creature that stalks the halls. It waits, patient, silent, hungry. For those who wander too close, for those who dare to enter Deadwater, it will take them. And no one who has ever set foot in this place has returned to tell the tale. The footsteps remain and he can't forget. The whispers in his head, they never cease. The voices of his friends, begging, pleading for him to find them. And the Hollow One from Deadwater, it is there still and continues to watch and wait. Truth or legend, Liam, Ben, Maya aren't real. But the legend of Deadwater Asylum, some say it's just another ghost story, an abandoned asylum shrouded in the mist, but others whisper that the Hollow One exists and roams the halls of that cursed place. Legends and truth are often hard to separate, because every legend begins somewhere with something. Every myth has a beginning. Every whispered tale is born from something. Maybe Deadwater is real, or maybe it and the Hollow One are creations of my own imagination. But if you ever find yourself near the old road and you see the sign, if the fog feels too thick and you hear footsteps behind you, don't stop, don't turn around, because the Hollow One is there, and it's still watching. In our next story, we will explore A ghostly tale from the forest, where sometimes the lost are not alone. Sometimes things happen that can't be explained by any logical means. Maybe we aren't meant to understand. Maybe we should just accept that sometimes they don't have to be explained, and we are just happy things turned out fine. Now for our last story. The ranger who never left. They said he vanished without a sound. 3-year-old Evan Cole was stacking pine cones in a neat little tower by the fire pit, humming to himself as his parents set up camp deep in Fernvale Forest. It was supposed to be a long weekend off-the-grid camping trip, just trees, stars, and each other. Marshall and Amelia Cole had hiked about 2 miles into the forest and set up camp with their son. They had fun fishing and taking Evan swimming in the small creek. Dinner was hot dogs cooked over an open fire and s'mores. They fell asleep exhausted the first night and woke early to the sounds of the forest. Breakfast was over, and Amelia was making the beds in the small tent. She glanced over at Evan playing right outside the tent. She was shaking out the last blanket when Marshall asked if she wanted anything to drink. He opened the cooler and she tossed the blanket back inside the tent. Maybe 10 seconds passed. She froze. She couldn't hear Evan, just silence. No laughter, no footsteps, just the empty stillness of the forest. He was gone, vanished in an instant. They called his name, shouting until their voices cracked. They searched the nearby trees, checked the water's edge, panic rising like a tidal wave. They made the decision for Marshall to stay and search, while Amelia, an experienced hiker and cross-country track coach, to leave and get help. Night fell and Marshall still found no sign of his son. By morning, the search had begun. Rangers were dispatched. Bloodhounds were flown in. Drones swept the ridgelines. Nothing. No footprints, no trail, no sounds. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. They stayed behind in a ranger truck, clinging to hope in the only way desperate people can. The stress of losing Evan in the run-out was too much for Amelia. Marshall asked the medics to give her something to calm her down. She fell asleep in the truck beside him. He sat there and just stared out into the trees, going over and over the seconds just before Evan vanished. They were told the first 48 hours were critical. And then the rain came, heavy, cold, and relentless. Even seasoned searchers started to lower their eyes when they walked back to camp. One of them quietly said they should prepare for a recovery, not a rescue. But on the 3rd morning, a call crackled over the radio. "We've got a kid, sitting on a bench at Birch Hollow Campground." The voice on the other end was shaken. "It's him, it's Evan." It made no sense. Birch Hollow was 15 miles from Fernvale. No trail connected them directly. The terrain was brutal. Slopes, tangled brush, deep creeks. It would have taken a trained adult several hours to bushwhack through. But there he was, a few scratches, hungry and crying for his parents. Later, Evan sat quietly on a weathered bench outside the ruins of the old ranger cabin, swinging his dirty legs and eating a PB&J. His face was pale, his scratches were now bandaged, and he was alive. When asked how he got to the made it out of the woods, he gave a quiet, clear answer. "The man found me." He said the man wore a big green coat with buttons that shone like bugs and a tall hat with a feather. He carried a flashlight and walked without making a sound. Said his name was Bill. His hands were cold, Evan whispered, but his voice was nice. He said not to be afraid. He told me he knew a place that was safe. We walked and walked. One of the older rangers, Miles, went into the back room of the station and came back out with a framed photograph of a ranger. Evan scanned the picture, then pointed. "That's him." The man he pointed to was Ranger William Granger. Granger had died 26 years ago in a sudden snowstorm while searching for a little 6-year-old girl who'd gone missing from Birch Hollow Campground. A freak cold front had slammed the region overnight. Whiteout conditions, frozen streams, ice coating the trees like glass. He radioed in once, saying he was heading toward a rocky outcrop near Birch Hollow Creek. That was the last anyone heard from him. 2 days later, they found him. He had taken shelter beneath a stony overhang, Using what little dry gear he had and some dead leaves and branches, he built a makeshift shelter to insulate himself and the child from the weather. She was alive, barely conscious, wrapped in his coat, but unharmed. He wasn't so lucky. Exposure took him during the second night, but he had managed to keep Emily warm and dry. The girl, Emily Shore, had gone missing from a campsite just feet from where Evan reappeared. That bench had once been part of the old ranger station. After Granger's body was recovered, he was laid there until the coroner arrived. No one could explain how Evan made it that far alone. No one could understand why his clothes stayed dry, or why his body temperature was normal despite 2 nights in the cold rain. That night, Marshall and Amelia didn't sleep. They sat curled together in the ranger cabin, trembling, not from fear, but the weight of nearly losing everything. She kept her hand on Evan while he slept like she thought he'd disappear if she looked away again. Later, one of the rangers went back to the bench, left a thermos of black coffee. It was just a gesture, but the coffee was gone by morning. Granger was a shadow that never left, a dedicated ranger who gave his life to save a child. They say that when a child goes too far into the woods, past the trees that watch and the silence that listens, he comes. Not to frighten, not to haunt, but to help. A ranger in green, with cold hands and warm eyes. Who knows where to find the lost, because once, long ago, he was one of them. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Whispers After Dark, Horror Stories to Sleep By. If these stories sent a chill down your spine, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss what waits in the shadows. Until then, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the whispers after dark.